The business end of beekeeping is what I am going to speak to, and it really is about, again, not an all-encompassing presentation, because there are parts of this that can be drilled down into that are really deep dive conversations, and a lot of research that you have to do for your own particular business. But I'm going to go ahead and discuss how you can at least get started, and some ideas on how this can look. Success, it's kind of funny, because if you make success what you can, but it does get messy, right? I'm trying to go ahead and get my laser pointer working. Let me see if I can do this. There it is. Okay, so if you get success to look like this, you're working too hard. It really doesn't. It doesn't even resemble that in the least. It looks a lot more like this, right? We all know the struggles of entrepreneurship and what a solo business owner looks like, and there are dynamics. There are personal dynamics. There are public dynamics. This year specifically has been extremely challenging, as we all know, in the business arena. And for those of us who have a contact point with the public, and literally like farmers markets and those kinds of things, this year has been extremely challenging. A lot of angst, a lot of tension in the system, and you have to be cognizant when you walk into those business opportunities that it is already electrified with tension, and somehow you have to diffuse that to get people to listen to your offer, right? So, so all of that is a challenge. The operational levels of business, of course, you've got hobbyist, sideliner, commercial. I'm just going to leave them there where they are, just because it's a breakdown that everyone understands, because everyone kind of slots themselves into these three categories, although I consider sideliner to be a misnomer. You know, there are different definitions of sideliner, and if you talk to the commercial guys, they'll put a number on it and say, well, it's less than 500 units, 500 colonies. If you put a category out there about, you know, defined sideliner, it's about somebody who has a bee business but also runs a day job. And most of us who are working sideliner level in numbers can't work a job. You literally cannot work a day job and run 300 or 250 colonies, in my personal opinion. So the hobbyist is self-inflicted stress. There's a lot there: growth, learning curve, issues with business. The sideliner is just terribly stressed because you're juggling flaming chainsaws, and the commercials, they just have too much to do to be stressed, right? So they're kind of used to boiling in that stew, in that broth. So when we talk about operational levels, we're talking about processes, revenue streams, supply chain logistics, and each are different for each of these categories. So we'll get and dive down into the hobbyist level just a little bit. Hobbyists, for those of you who are hobbyists, and are still interested in the business aspects of how to get a revenue stream to pay for your hobby, or at least some supplemental income. You have to first look at it as a business, and how can it pay for itself. So you have to quantify your equipment and your bees and your losses and all of those things, what the return on investment looks like. What's that ROI point where it actually seems successful for you? And everybody's definition is different for that. So return on investment for someone at my level is, you know, it pays its own bills. It pays for its expansion, equipment replacement, marketing, sales, and I get enough income where I don't have to think, well, I need a night job or a weekend job, right? So it's all dependent on harvest and sales streams. And for the hobbyist, I think the biggest challenge is getting to harvest, getting those bees healthy and successful, productive enough to where you actually get a honey harvest or whatever harvest it is that you're going to turn into a revenue stream, and then finding those revenue streams, right? So finding revenue streams is a little bit of what we're going to talk about a little bit later. So hang in there for that. Sideliner, I said before, a bit of a misnomer. We're working too hard, too many hours to even think about a second job. And I think you're either living on one side or the other. Either, you know, you're successful with your bees, or you're successful in paying for your bees. But it's hard to find that happy medium in between. That's kind of what sideliner means to me. And commercial, small or large, you know, I consider myself to be commercial because I don't work another job. This business is my job, and it is a 14 to 16 hour a day job, 7 days a week. Even in the winter, I'm working R&D for new product launches. I'm working marketing, sales, label design, you know, you name it, financials. I'm working it in the off season. So there really is no off season for someone who's working at this level, anything over, I think, 200 colonies, 200 units. So, and you do wear a lot of hats, unless you, of course, are successful enough and you have enough revenue stream where you can hire people. And that comes with its own headaches. I had a farm prior to this where I had employees, and employees can be a handful. So you are never done. I love this picture. I use this picture in my other presentation as well. Give credit to John Bradley on the Commercial Beekeepers Facebook site. He allows me to use this picture. It's kind of funny because when you look at this picture, I kind of have this little vision in my head where I think to myself, you know, we launch into this every spring in March, and it's kind of like a Ferris wheel ride, right? You're like, oh, I can't wait to get on and go faster, go faster. And then by November, you're like, can I get off now, right? So let's talk about product lines a little bit. And this is really business, beekeeper business person's most difficult decision, I really think, because it's so diverse. Beekeeping itself is very diverse. There's so many options. It's hard to land on one thing, but I suggest people land on three. Land on three revenue streams to give you the diversity. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. So for me, it's bees, you know, and it's the honey. And then I have another homeopathic line because I was an organic veterinarian. So I rely on those revenue streams, and those are the ones that I work. So agility, adaptability. With any business, you have to be agile. You have to be able to move at a moment's notice, because that's what gives you your advantage. Your business advantage is really about being able to move faster than the big guys, right? Because they're not agile. They're cumbersome, and it takes them a long time to make committee type decisions to launch products or spend money on research and development and those kinds of things. Whereas when you're one person or a two-person team, you can make those decisions in a heartbeat on a phone call, right? So here are your options for revenue streams and products. Honey, bees, queens, propolis, pollen, beeswax, kind of breaks down into those categories. The honey is really wholesale, retail, the farmers markets, value-added products like mead, infused cream. All of those come under that honey category. And there are, again, there's a lot of diversity even within the honey category. For bees, you've got nukes, whole colonies, pollination services, plenty of options there as well. And I know a lot of commercial guys run both pollination services and nukes because they got to do something with all those damn bees once they come out of almonds, right? So nukes are where that excess goes for them. That's their harvest. Queens, I know some very, very incredibly talented queen people who just do queens. Lori Miller down in Tacoma is one of them, does a brilliant job with queens. There's a great queen breeding forum on Facebook as well. You'll meet a lot of those guys who do really good work in queens, and you can sell those mated. You'd sell cells, you can sell them with brood frames. I know people who have emailed me just recently looking for a queen and a frame of brood to boost something that's dwindling on them. So, and you can sell those for 75, 80 bucks, right? So propolis, I don't get a lot of call for propolis, although occasionally at farmers markets I will get somebody asking for it. It's usually something that's formulated in a tincture, so it's a wholesale type commodity. For the most part, it's fussy, but you gotta do a lot of collecting. I don't mess with it. So I don't know all that much about it. Drill down on that one if that's something you're interested in. Pollen's the same way. I do get requests for pollen, so I know that is a product line that may be of interest to a potential business entrepreneur. So look into that one if you're interested in that one. And beeswax, everybody's always asking for beeswax because you've got all these balm and candle people, right? So beeswax is very popular. You can get it on Amazon though, so your price point isn't very profitable. It's not like retail honey where you can bring a bit of a profit margin to it. So wholesale retail, you can do that in honey as well. So let's get on to economies of scale. So as a hobbyist, you're kind of at that low tier where you're starting out. And to transition from one level to the next level, what you really have to do is you really have to think about process improvement. So it's about continuous process improvement. And if you can get into the habit of thinking about your beekeeping that way, you can certainly move from one level to the next level. And that means supply chain, inventory control. Like I said in the last presentation this year, it's been a disaster for supply chain. Getting equipment and getting in line for equipment. Personally, I have a really good contact at Mann Lake, so I had no problems at all getting the equipment I needed. And I brought in 2 full pallets of frames this season, and I got them within days. So, so you have to make those relationships and understand that volume is one of the issues where the more volume you purchase, of course, the more dollars you spend, the more attention you get. I know Corey, it's Nahomish Bee. He's there for everybody to go ahead and get you equipment if you need equipment at really good, reasonable prices. So I'm going to put a plug in for Corey. Love Corey. Product distribution, logistics. This is always an issue for someone starting out, just because you can't sell retail except for farmers markets and small outlets. So distribution logistics isn't your problem as a small startup. But when you get into the higher level where you're actually putting out volumes, you know, 5,000, 10,000 pounds of honey a year, then you get to start having issues with, well, how do I get product down to Queen Anne without having to drive it down there in a pickup truck and spend all that money in gas, right? And shipping, shipping has become a big, huge issue this season, or else Amazon would still be using the US Postal Service and not driving their own trucks, right? So, so that's always an issue, something to think about. How do I get it there? I used to pick up my own jars and bottles for bottling. But you can't do that this year. They won't let you pick up anything at distribution centers or even stores for the most part when you're buying in wholesale lots of things. So everything had to be shipped this season, and that costs money. So you have to put that into your financials, that kind of business continuity has to be engineered, and you have to think about that ahead of time, what it's going to cost if your supply chain starts to break down. Sugar was a big problem this season with hoarding in April. And we have a dearth here out on the islands in between the maple and the blackberry. So right when my dearth hit in that interim, of course, I couldn't get sugar. And I was literally on the phone call with CNC and trying to get them to bring in pallets, and wound up buying a tote, which I had to go drive to Tacoma to go pick up. So business can be dicey. You have to be agile, you have to be adaptable, you have to move when the opportunities arise. Okay, so let's look at this again. Is some of the supply chain issues. I already kind of went over these, so I won't go over them again. But know that when you go ahead and you have equipment come in, you can't be doing this in May, right? Because that's your swarm season, and you've got to be out in the boxes. You've got to be managing bees. You can't be painting and assembling boxes. So you have to think a whole season ahead, and be proactive in business about what you're doing and when you're doing it. If I need sugar, this year taught me just in time is no longer an option. So just in time supply chain doesn't work anymore. And so having sugar on board and in inventory costs cash. So you have to think about cash flow. But at the same time, if you don't have it, it costs bees. And the death of bees, losses of bees will close down your business as well. So it's a balancing act, and you have to balance all of those issues. Okay? So think about your consumable supplies. Think about feeding, treating, supporting brood, honey development, R&D, because all those things take supplies and take money. Okay? Storage is another problem in business. So you have to think about laydown space and storage for equipment. And the larger you get, the more problems you have with where to put stuff, right? There's tons of stuff in this business between the boxes and the frames and the feeding and the treatments and everything else. So I really do go ahead and I try to dual use as much of my equipment as I possibly can. So my inner covers are my bee escapes for harvest, those kinds of things. And it always helps if you can go ahead and, for me, I've literally stacked on pallets and tarped to keep the weather off of equipment, and that's worked. So when you're smaller, you can deal with the problems in a more short-term methodology because you don't have as much stuff to deal with, and it'll work okay. Okay? So storage for all the equipment, inventory for your products, right? Not only inventory for your products, but inventory for your product packaging and your product labeling and all your marketing materials and your sales information and all of that. You can't just think about just the bee side of the business. You have to think about also the business side of the business and what it takes in production shop, outbuilding space. Are those spaces bee proofed, right? Nothing more disastrous than going into your honey house and realizing that they found a way in and your extractor is completely filled with bees. It's awful. So next we're going to look a little bit at business structure. Anybody ever feel like this? It's like all the time for me. If I'm not talking to somebody about bees, it's just kind of a depressing party. So there are some options for you. for business structure, we've got sole proprietor, LLC, LLP, and corporation. So those are the three that are most useful in the beekeeping world or livestock farming. So the sole proprietor is certainly the easiest to get into. You've got no employees. It's even if you do have an employee, it's not that hard. There's no real personal liability protection though. So if bankruptcy does happen, if somehow the business goes south on you and you've got outstanding loans, then they'll come after your car and your house and whatever the assets they can get. The LLC LLP has a bit more protection for liability. So it really is a better option, and that's the option that I went with this time. I'm an LLC, limited liability corporation. You have partnerships as well. There are complexities. I am not a business attorney and I am not a certified public accountant. So anything that I would say about any of this stuff, please go research and find professional help that will give you advice that works for you. I'm just telling you what works for me. Okay. So the state requires, they have fees for LLCs and require articles of incorporation. They're pretty simple to manage. You can Google it and get a you know, a go by and work with that. It's a little bit more complex than the sole proprietorship, but again, offers you personal liability protection a little bit better. When you get into the LLPs, there's percentages, and we'll talk a little bit about structure as far as managing money out, which a lot of this is really important to understand so that you can pay yourself and get money back out of the business. And these structures help you navigate that. I had an S Corp at one point. It's very good for protection, personal protection, and it really does help, but you really do need an attorney to navigate this one. So I would really find someone that will help you go ahead and get your articles of incorporation done, and you'll have all kinds of, it requires more people because you've got more officers in a corporation. So it's worth doing if you feel that you've got the potential to go to that level. You can always change up your structure at a later date as well. So who cares? Bottom line, the IRS and you. It's about liability and it's about taxes, always, right? So those are the important things. The government will want their cut, as usual. They always want their cut. So money out, how do you get paid? So the important thing to note here is that you can take owner draws, you can certainly get dividends out of the company, and distributions. And those are kind of the three ways that you can get paid with your business to get money back out of the business, because you are going to put a lot of money into the business initially, and you're going to want at some point to be able to get paid. Right? That's our goal in life anyway. So the single member LLC is about the easiest. It's a personal tax return Schedule C. And you can take owner draws. The LLP gets a little bit more complex because the percentage between the partners is dictated based on the draws that you take. And so you have to be a little bit more concerned about how much draw you take so that you don't lose your controlling interest if that's something that you're more interested in. So that business structure is really important to understand. Again, you need professional help to go ahead and get you set up for that. Of course, the S Corp is very complex. You've got office of salary and owner's draws. And the one thing I would stay away from is dividends, just because dividends have the propensity to do have a double taxation issue. And so you get profit tax for the firm and an income tax when you get the personal income. So dividends aren't really as good an option as owner draws. All right, and distributions are just based on the profits from the firm and owner share. So, so distributions are certainly something that can happen once your company is profitable. Say once your company is profitable, not if, but once it is profitable. Okay, so the sole proprietorship, of course, you pay the taxes on the profits the company makes regardless of draws. And so you're out there, you're kind of married in a sole proprietorship to the business, and what it does is kind of what you do. All right. Know that there are, unless you're drawing a salary, the S Corp, you probably have to take a salary with an S Corp before you can take draws. And the IRS has a lot of rules as to the definition of reasonable compensation that they expect before you go ahead and start taking those tax savings draws. And I think the break point is between 35 and 50K of salary a year. And then there's some 401k issues, and whether or not you can pull it into a 401k, your retirement, or you have to take it directly into an IRA. Again, all of those things, go see a professional, tax professional. All right, so financials. Financials are, I have to admit, the bane of my existence. This is not my area of expertise. I know QuickBooks, and I really suggest that you get a consultant for QuickBooks to set up for beekeeping, because there are some ways to set up for beekeeping that are more lucrative, better for you than others. And so it's worth spending 2 or 3 hours a couple of times with a consultant. You might pay, you know, between $300 and $500 to get that all set up and ready to go. But once it's all set up and you get into the habit of putting in those receipts monthly when your bank statement comes in, it gets pretty quick and less painless, or less painful. Sorry, less painful. So operations. So process flow is the most important thing you can do when you get into calling your hobby, your beekeeping hobby, a business. It's about looking at how processes work in your system. And everybody has very personal ways in which they work. The process that I use for one particular task is not going to be the same process that another beekeeper uses, because maybe they're not comfortable with doing one of the steps, the key steps that I use that I'm very comfortable with. And so they manage it by engineering a different way of doing that process. And that's totally fine, whatever is most efficient for you as an individual. But some of the things that you do have to think about here are being able to identify root causes for losses. So this is a pretty expensive bag of pollen sub. And I don't know if anyone else, well, probably not those of you on the east side of the mountains, but here on the islands, rats are the biggest problem. If you talk to any pest person, rats are our problem. And so I have the biggest problem keeping my stuff protected. Not only the pollen sub, but the sugar, equipment. They just chew and tear up everything. I've had them even come up through a concrete floor. So it's important to identify what it's going to take to secure your business and your assets. And another thing is labor efficiency. What is the most efficient way for you to do something? Is it going to be doing it this way? Or is it more efficient, even though it takes a few more steps to do it another way, because you can get multiple tasks done in multiple processes, right? So economies of you know, scale, but also of time. Not only money, that not only works for money, it also works for time and labor. So and eliminating mistakes. So once you make a mistake, it's good not to go ahead and repeat it, right? And how many of us just kind of repeat the same mistake over and over again. By eliminating those mistakes, your business will become more successful. You'll also save money. And as a hobbyist, that's not really that important because the aesthetics, the intangibles are more valuable than the tangibles. But when you get into business, you have to start thinking about the tangibles and the valuation of the tangibles as well. Cost reductions. How do I save money in order to go ahead and pay me more wages, right? How can I personally benefit from this business instead of the business just benefiting from the business, right? Which is what a lot of times it winds up being. The business thrives, but we've spent all of our energy and all of our money getting it someplace where it's successful, but it's not really giving us a return on our investment that we would like. So cost reduction, how do I spend, instead of spending 56 cents a pound on sugar, how do I get it down to 38 cents a pound on sugar? And sometimes that requires going ahead and buying volumes, and that may require more cash up front, but the cost, the savings will be a benefit in a long term. Just-in-time inventory control used to be my methodology. This year, I got kicked in the butt with that. So this is my sugar inventory now. I keep enough on hand to go ahead and feed everything I have for at least 2 or 3 feedings. And that way I know that nothing's going to starve while I am scrambling to find more feed. And dual use components. Okay? So just in time can be a two-edged sword. You can curb costs, but if there's a run on something, you could be out of luck. So be careful of the inventory control. Miscellaneous issues. So with miscellaneous, I just kind of lumped everything in here that I thought would be something when you go back to the slide deck, you at least have something to toggle your mind and say, oh yeah, I got to think about that. So insurance, permits, licensing, and taxation. These are all those incidentals that kind of happen in the background that you don't think about until somebody says, oh, you want to do a farmer's market? Well, you need insurance. So, these are some of the insurance things that you can toggle into. The permits and licenses, for the most part, most cities do not have an additional permit fee required, but you'll be told by the organizer, by the manager of the farmer's market, if there is one. Like Lake Stevens has an additional fee that you have to apply for through the state for permit. So those are things that you have to think about. And also, if you're working with honey, are you going to process it? Are you going to do anything to it besides just take it out of the frame and put it in a jar? Because that you can do in the state of Washington without having additional permits or licenses. But the minute you even think about going ahead and doing an infused honey, a flavored honey, or a creamed honey in some counties, you have to check with your county on creamed honey. Some require a cottage license or a commercial kitchen license, and some don't. Know that if you do need a commercial kitchen license, you can oftentimes rent a commercial kitchen space on an hourly basis. You just have to do the research to find one locally that will allow you to do that and rent the space, okay? And then there's all of these regulations. These are Washington State regulations on honey processing, on beekeeping, registering hives. All of those things are in these RCWs and WACs. So those are something that you need to go look at and read the regs and figure out if it applies to you and what you have to do to make that happen. The B&O taxes from this to the state, usually quarterly payment. It's not very high on the gross, and for the most part, for the first few years, you won't even make the gross, and And that number means that you won't have to pay B&O tax until you get to that minimum gross. Okay. All right. Anything else? Let's just go on to take-home points. Let's see. Yep, we're almost there.
You got about 5 minutes, Jennifer.
It's okay. I'm on my last slide, Kevin.
Excellent. Good job.
Woohoo! Wow, this is great. So, take-home points. In my humble opinion, 200 to 250, that's the limit one really good hardworking beekeeper can manage. And I've had 25 years. My private practice was mobile ambulatory and organic dairy, which is the most finicky, fickle product, difficult farming you can do is organic dairy. And for me, this number is about all I can manage. So I know what it takes to do this number. I expand from around 200 to about 300 in May and June. And I sell bees and queens and honey. And so the growth, I think, really needs to be done holistically. And what that means is there's no sense in producing 10 tons of honey if you have no place to sell it. Right? So it's just going to sit on a shelf somewhere and crystallize on you. So if you intend to go ahead and make those kinds of commitments to that level of effort, you've also got to do the holistic work to make sure that your outlets are lined up ahead of time. And that back work takes time to do. That's about relationships, and relationships take time to build. It's taken me 5 years to build the relationships to put me into a dozen retail outlets. So it's time consuming, and it's labor intensive. So, and then the minute one part, this is kind of a tip. One part of the business lags behind, every other part follows it, right? So you're going to move at the speed of the slowest part of your business. And that's historically the way business goes. So if you know that you're really bad at financials, or you're really bad at one aspect of this business, then that's the part that you really either have to find help and pay for help to support you, or you need to get smart about that part of that business and do it yourself. Okay. So that all said, survival this year, it's really been about agility, adaptability. My doors are still open, and I know a lot of entrepreneurs whose doors are no longer open. So it's about being able to continue to innovate and create and look at adversity and not be afraid, be brave, be courageous, and know that business continuity it really depends on cash flow and supply chain logistics. You have to get those two things under control, and you have to have them under control all the time. You can't lose control of either one of those, or your business stops. Right? And so be proactive about those two things and about managing those two things religiously, and you should be in pretty good shape. I really understand this right now. I'm so tired. Farmers markets just ended this last weekend.
Jennifer, thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Yeah, guys.
Hey, so there are some questions for you.
Yeah, anybody who is interested in more, I know we had to cut the other presentation short, and I got a lot of emails and messages on my website from people wanting to know more. So I have this slide in the slide deck so that you can go ahead and communicate with me. I do most of my communicating like 4 in the morning to 8 in the morning, and then I'm out in yards after that. So, so that's the time to talk to me if you want to talk to me, and you're very welcome to do so.
A couple of quick questions for you. How much money can one hive generate per year?
It depends on the year. I know that's evasive, and ambiguous, but it really does depend on the product that you've chosen, and it depends on the production for that season, and then it depends on the retail demand of that product. So business is all about marrying all those three items. It's about understanding your livestock and what they're capable of and what their production level is going to be, which means you have to be a botanist. You have to literally know what's going to be blooming in your area, in your bee world. You have to know what your intake is going to be for production and that average. This year I'm averaging right around 40 to 50 pounds per hive. At retail, that's going to run right around $500 to $600. So my bees are making $600 a unit. But that means I have to sell retail. That's my demand. My market niche is retail. If your market niche is wholesale or you're private labeling honey, it's going to be different, right?
So another question is, how much property do you need for 250 hives?
You don't need any. I know, I just confused a whole lot of people. So, so you really don't need, and you can't really put 200 or 250 hives in one area, right? Because the forage just won't support that level of demand on the resources. So you do have to spread those bees out over space so that you marry the demand on the nectar source with the livestock needs plus the excess that you want out of it. So it's like dairy. It's exactly like dairy. You're not only feeding the animal, but you're feeding the excess that the animal's going to make so that you can go ahead and harvest that. And when you look at bees and you look at the radius of bees and how they forage, if you've got, on my particular island, if I've got more than 30 or 40 units 2 to 3 miles apart, I'm starving them because I'm forest here on this island. My big flow is blackberry and I have maple in the spring, but aside from that, it's pine and and alder. So you have to know what the available resources are in your area in order to know where to place your hives. And you can't have that property personally. You can't own that property, every 2 or 3 miles. That's crazy. So you have to find property owners that are willing to work with you to allow you to put hives on their property. And I have host a hive property all over 3 counties. So
one final quick question: are pollen and wax taxed?
They are not food. Well, pollen is a food resource if you sell it as a supplement. So as a food resource, it wouldn't be taxed. And what wax will be taxed because it's not food.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you again, Jennifer.